Well, Abdu asked me to address you on the topic of career progression in relation to the HE workforce plan, which sounds very impressive, but this 92-page document only mentions SAS doctors once, and that wasn't in relation to orthopedic surgery, it was in relation to emergency medicine. In fact, the document makes no mention of surgery at all until the appendix, and therefore you can see from the graph on the right there that really the whole document focuses on consultants and all sorts of other professional groups, and really completely overlooks the members of this audience, and therefore my talk could be extremely short, and I could therefore be leaving the podium right now, which I didn't think was really quite what Mamdouh wanted me to do, so I've had to try and patch together something that I hope will cover some of the issues. I think there may be a degree of overlap with what David has just said, but I really wanted to sort of tell you a little bit about what is available for you in terms of funding to support your own development, and invite you to consider what the goals for your own personal development should be, discuss what opportunities there might be for your own development, discuss with you perhaps some of the things that might make that difficult and what might make it a little bit easier, and then briefly touch on what the role of the SAC might be in that. Now, there is money out there to support your personal development. It's completely separate from the study leave budget. It's funded in different ways in the different regions of the United Kingdom. In Scotland, where I'm from, the funding is ring-fenced. It's quite limited in terms of the time that you can take it, but it's also specifically focused on what the service wants out of you. You can't say, well, I want to go and spend 6 months doing X, Y, or Z. If the service wants you actually to do either A, B, or C, they'll give you money to do A, B, or C, but they won't necessarily give you the money for what you want to do. In England, it's slightly different. The money isn't ring-fenced. It's part of the medical professional education and training budget, and therefore you have to compete with consultants for that money. And of course, the implementation and distribution of that funding varies from LETB to LETB, but it does have the advantage that it's a little bit more individually focused. So there are opportunities, there is money for you there. The question is, how would you choose to use it, and what are the goals therefore for your own individual development? Is your goal to perhaps fulfill a particular local need or niche in the clinical workplace? Are you going to become specifically a foot and ankle surgeon for the region, or are you going to become an expert in one particular procedure, which does tend to border on what is increasingly being discussed and is something I'm sure we will hear more about over the next few years, which is credentialing. I have read the recent GMC consultation document on credentialing, and well, it's obviously still out for consultation. I think I'm not entirely clear that it will address all of your personal individual needs. And I think certainly my perception until yesterday was that a very high proportion of you were wanting to go down the CSER route. Mamdouh actually said that his perception was that it was perhaps only about 15% of SAS doctors who wanted to go down that route. So if I have, in talking and mentioning CSER through this talk, it's a difference in perception, and I apologise for that. What are the opportunities for you to develop yourself? Well, there are obviously in-house opportunities, but I would suggest to you that there is seldom one house that will provide you with all the opportunities that you could want. many SAS doctors work in district general hospitals, and unless it's a particularly big district general hospital, it's unlikely to provide you with all the subspecialty areas that you want, and even if it did, it's not necessarily only going to provide you perhaps with one particular trainer in one particular area. So in-house opportunities, I would suggest to you, are rarely comprehensive. If you take the bigger picture and look within the region of your own training, that's great. But if you work in, or take my own region, if you work in Ayr, I don't know that I'd be particularly happy with you saying, well, actually, can you send me up to Glasgow for 6 months so that I can do such and such? It's not quite as easy from our perspective as that, and it does, there are service conflicts. Very many of you will have service roles that need to be fulfilled and will be difficult to replace if you were to move away for 6 months. So that is a difficulty. And I suggested yesterday, and I still think, although it's a counsel of perfection, it's not easy to do, that if you keep moving around, that you're more likely to get yourself the range of opportunities to develop yourself. But it isn't easy from a personal point of view, it's expensive, but it does at least allow you to, within the time period that you may be wishing to develop yourself, likely to give you the breadth of opportunities. And of course, you're as eligible as anybody to apply for fellowship type experience, particularly in subspecialty areas. So there are opportunities, and there is funding available to help you. But there are difficulties, and I just try and make what was otherwise going to be a fairly bald slide look a little bit interesting. Came up with this quote which was attributed to Churchill, although I'm not absolutely certain that it is. And David alluded to the fact that there are difficulties in CSER applicants covering the whole curriculum. Research he mentioned, spinal surgery he mentioned, paediatrics he mentioned, but I think increasingly major trauma is going to become a difficult thing. We looked at, with Mike Reed and myself, we looked at the changes in the distribution of trauma training opportunities within the northern region before and after the introduction of the major trauma networks, which showed a quite significant shift of particularly intramedullary nalings and some of the more major procedures. And therefore, if you are working in a district general hospital, you're going to have difficulty in fulfilling the requirements of the curriculum. And as David also mentioned, the issue of the timeline, trying to maintain currency of experience, which, as I say, won't repeat. But there are things that will make it easy, and largely again overlapping with David, use the logbook. It is a very comprehensive, there's no restriction in access to the logbook. The reports that it produces really do give the evaluators a detailed view of your experience and your supervision within that. The portfolio systems, well, you can get some access to them at the moment, but that will definitely become easier with the next version of ISCP. And as David indicated also, you've got to keep all your WBAs, your CBDs, your KEXs, and not just PBAs. Keep them all up to date. It will produce a mountain of paperwork. And thank God for ISCP with trainees, because we would be chopping down forests left, right and centre if all that was to be on paper. And obviously keep your various reviews up to date. And therefore, really, just to conclude, a brief view on the role of the SAC. It is a subcommittee of the Joint Committee on Surgical Training. Our role is to quality assure training. We work with the BOA Training Standards Committee on the development of the curriculum, and we are the people who carry out the CSER evaluations for the GMC, evaluating you against the curriculum and the CCT guidelines, which we are more responsible for maintaining, because we have to make sure that they are relevant to training. And a question that I am or a complaint I would say that I frequently hear is that we're too hard. But actually it's a very rigorous process. As explained to some of you yesterday, we do an awful lot to make sure that it is fair. It's just that we have a very well structured, very well designed curriculum that it is difficult to match if you're not actually on an official training program. And I say just that there are difficulties obviously in maintaining the breadth and currency of your experience and research and audit, which does slightly over, as say, trying to put together a talk when the subject that you've asked to be basically doesn't exist does pose some challenges. So I hope I've put a few pieces in the jigsaw and given you some ideas, and thank you very much for your attention.